Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone who has joined us today. It's so wonderful to see that people from different countries, different time zones have managed their schedules to be able to join us at this very special webinar called as the dark side of mental health that nobody talks about. This is organized by Architects of Life and Global Leadership Consultancy. We have a wonderful panel of speakers over here, and we can guarantee this is going to be a very enriching and an engaging session. We would be waiting for a minute or so that all the participants can join in. Before that, please remember to mute your microphones while the speakers are talking. And it would be great if you could have your videos on so that we can see who all are attending our webinar today. Let's quickly get to know each other by having a look at what profiles do we all represent. If you are a social worker or a counselor, you can type in 1 in the chat box. If you are a person who yourself is going through some mental health issues or you know someone, then you can press 2 in the chat box. Awesome. Wow. Thank you. Thank you. Keep it going. It's really encouraging to see different profiles of people attending this webinar. And we hope that you go back feeling enriched and more empowered after listening to the fantastic speakers that we have today. Do remember to turn off your microphones all the time and turn on your video cameras so that the speakers and we can see you. I'll quickly go through the program outline so that we know what you expect from today's session. So after the opening and introduction, we will have our first speaker speak at 8:15. 8:35 would be the second speaker, 8:55 the third speaker, and then we have a good 15 to 20 minutes for your question answer session. I know this is one of the most important part of any webinar. So the QR code that you see over here in front of your screen is the link to the Q&A. You can scan this and send in your questions so that we are able to pass it to the speakers when they have to read out. The QR code will be flashed in every few minutes, and we also pump in the link for the Q&A in the chat box. It's the Pigeonhole Q&A link. It's already pumped in the chat group, I can see. So please download it, access it so that you can ask all your questions today. I know we had said that this session will end by 9:30, but since we have such a wonderful panel of speakers and I expect a lot of questions coming up during the seminar, we would end by 7:40, 7:45. I hope you all don't mind staying back around 10 minutes longer. It's definitely going to be worth it. Moving on. Can we move on to the next slide? Thank you. I'd like to introduce the organizations who have taken the initiative to organize this wonderful webinar. Today's webinar is co-organized by Architects of Life and Global Leadership Consultancy. AOL is a non-profit social enterprise working with youth at risk and ex-offenders. And GLC is a leading learning and development agency that believes in human potential and performance. These two agencies were founded by Mr. Glenn Lim. Glenn is a breakthrough psychologist and a transformational coach. He has been equipping and enabling clients to break through their stuck behaviors and achieve to their fullest potential. Now, Glenn will be sharing a few words before we begin the seminar. Over to you, Glenn.
Thank you so much, Aditi, and welcome everybody to tonight's webinar, The Dark Side of Mental Health. If you guys can hear me loud and clear, can you just do me a quick favor? Type into the chat box number 1. Yeah, type in a 1 so that I know that you guys are ready to rock and roll. as well as all systems are clear, smooth, and also ready to go. Thank you so much. Thank you. Wow, so many of you here today. It's really difficult to acknowledge every single one of you, but suffice to say, we are really excited to launch or to soft launch something here tonight. Both these organizations, AOL, which stands for Architects of Life, as well as GLC, Global Leadership Consultancy, were founded on one single premise, and that is its strong core belief in human potential. That's it. Human performance, living to our fullest potential and excellence. And so tonight is like somewhat of a soft launching of the Academy. The Academy is going to be focused on, again, human performance potential. It will be featuring high level training and education, and such webinars will be held on a regular basis. We call these part of the series of MindMatters. So every now and then we might organize a panel or some subject matter experts to speak on their pet topics and what is really needed in the mental health space, healing and therapeutic industry. So judging from the turnout from tonight, it only goes to show how important this subject matter is on mental health. Tonight, it gives me great pleasure to introduce three distinguished speakers tonight. They are Dr. Sunadas, Dr. Leslie Lim, and Dr. Fred Tok, all of whom I have the great privilege and honor to call friends, mentors, and also co-workers in this space. Together, they have more than 100 years of expertise in therapy, mental health, trauma-informed work, psychiatry, and psychology. I'll be doing them a great disservice by just saying that they are subject matter experts. They are the trainer's trainer, consultant's consultant. And so I do want you to be fully engaged tonight. Use the Pigeonhole platform, which is a secondary platform for your Q&A, because each one of them are going to do a TED Talk style, a very quick fire flash presentation, followed by the panel discussion. The questions will come in fast and furious. We can only select based on categories, so I hope you don't mind that. Now, to do us the honors of moderating this panel and introducing them, I can't find anyone more suitable than Dr. John Tan. Hey, by the way, all of them are doctors and also they are leaders in their own field. So Dr. John Tan is a very good friend of mine. We've known each other since the 90s when we were still youth. He's still doing youth work. He's a youth worker specialist, and he's the executive director of Care Singapore, one of the leading agencies, non-profit agencies in Singapore, serving the government and various institutions. And also, he is the founder and former chair of YWAS, the Youth Worker Association of Singapore. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce my good friend, and he will do the unenviable honors of moderating, facilitating tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome Dr. John Tan.
Thank you very much, Glenn. That was such an introduction. Yeah, so a warm welcome to everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. And just from looking at the chat earlier, we have people calling in from all over the world. In fact, in this gathering together, we are together indeed on a very, very tough and often stigmatized topic of mental health. And the fact is that today we are covering from the point of view of the dark side, right? So I have the, in a way, difficult task to moderate such a distinguished panel. And also, I believe that the questions will be coming in, so I would ask for your indulgence and perhaps forgiveness first, because not all questions can be chosen, right? Because in the interest of putting forth in terms of categories, right? So my task right now, if I can have the slides on, I'm supposed to introduce all the speakers, right? So in the order in which they will be presenting their talks and then later coming back as a panel. All right, so first up on the list, so we have Dr. Sundaras Anamale. And Dr. Sundaras is actually an award-winning entrepreneur, best-selling author, is a professor of natural medicine and naturopath in Singapore. He has been in business for 33 years. He's the CEO of NTC Alliance Group of Companies and has clients from all over the world, 25 countries, right? He teaches, he trains, he mentors, he coaches expert leaders for a design life, right? And today his topic is about uncovering the impact of unresolved trauma, all right? After he has presented, he will be followed by Professor Leslie Lim, all right? Prof. Lim is presently working as a senior consultant in a public hospital, specializing in the treatment of depressive and anxiety disorders. Besides teaching and training in local universities in Singapore, he has contributed to numerous publications and books to reduce the stigma on depression and anxiety. And for this webinar, his topic is about exploring the dark side of anxiety and depression, all right? And the last, but definitely not the least of our distinguished panel of speakers, we have Dr. Fred Hogue. And Dr. Fred has helped thousands of people reach their career, personal, and relationship goals by offering comprehensive business and personal life skill training programs. And when Dr. Fred was asked how he liked to be introduced, well, he says A through F. What does that mean? All right, so I'm just listing down the letters of the alphabet A through F. So he likes to describe himself as A for author, B for a believer of benevolence, C, a clinical psychologist, D, as a director of people for care and learning, E, as an educator, teacher, trainer, and a TEDx speaker, and F, very important, is a father of two and husband of one. All right, we take that. Thank you very much. So without further ado, it gives me great pleasure then to welcome to the podium Dr. Sundaras with the topic Uncovering the Impact of Unresolved Trauma. Dr. Sundaras, please.
Thank you, John. Thank you very much for the invitation. And thank you, Glenn. Thank you, Dr. John Tan, for the introduction. And thank you, Glenn, for inviting me. I'm going to talk about unresolved trauma. And I've been obsessed by this for the last 30 plus years for reasons of my own. So I'm a professor of natural medicine, co-author and author of 12 books focusing on natural health and mind-body wellness. And I presented and worked with autism, trauma, and phobias, doing seminars and treating patients with trauma for the last 28 years to 30 years. And I'm going to talk about trauma all the way from a 4-year-old child to people in their 50s. And why is this important? Because trauma is mostly unrecognized, mostly unappreciated, and most people don't get it that their lives are in trouble because they have unresolved trauma. So let's talk about examples of what a trauma would be like and what it would manifest as. So trauma can be intrusive memories, a startled response. Your friend comes up to you and says hello and you jump like your life is on the line. Shame, self-hatred, panic attacks, emotional overwhelm, chronic pain and headaches, eating disorders, substance abuse, and self-destructive behaviors, little or no memory. So some people will have too many memories that go back and are painful, and others, if you ask them, oh, can you remember what happened? And they go, you know what? I don't remember anything. There's hypervigilance. This is you're watching for something to go wrong all the time. Disassociation. They don't feel what's happening to them. Something really bad happens and you ask them, how do you feel? They go, nothing. Depression. What does it mean to be depressed? If somebody is sufficiently depressed and they haven't lived any other way, they wouldn't know how to even describe it as depression. Irritability, loss of interest. There is also the feeling of being numb. They seem to have it's like no highs, no lows, boom. Insomnia, decreased concentration, a sense of hopelessness. Now, we are describing it as if nobody is going to have all of this, okay? So it's okay if you don't have it all. You're going to have some of it. And there's going to be a degree of mild, severe, moderate, severe to intense. The whole thrust of my little presentation is to talk about how a lot of it starts in early childhood. You get programmed a certain way, and then depending on life circumstances, something triggers it. So right now we are in the midst of COVID, and you see many people breaking down or having challenges. And I'm going to suggest that how well you cope with a difficult situation is really about whether you had significant triggers in your past or you didn't. So how does childhood trauma lead to chronic ill health? It develops stress and coping mechanisms. It's a vicious cycle of chronic stress from trauma and ill health. Pattern recognition response. So the moment you see something or somebody that reminds you of a authority figure who gave you a hard time, it triggers something. Psychological changes. Catastrophic thinking. Every little thing in your life is going to be in trouble. You're going to be challenged. You may even die. Okay, so every little thing gets blown up. There is a biochemical issue, inflammatory cascade. So with chronic illnesses, autoimmune disorders, we normally see that somebody has got a childhood process. Chronic fatigue, loss of motivation, negative beliefs, the emotional and innate needs not being met, and sometimes they don't even recognize it's not being met, depression and ill health. So just to be clear, the patterning, the traumatic interlude, the programming starts in early childhood between the ages of 0 to 7. Then something triggers it on later on in life and people start feeding it. And this can happen anything as from 15, 25, 30, 40s, even in the 50s. And that's where the trouble starts, because it's really very hard for people to comprehend that the seeds of their distress, the seeds of their trauma actually started from 0 to 7. So it has an impact on cognition, impact on physical health, impact on emotions, on relationships, on mental health, on behavior, on brain development. So the impact can extend to really a wide perspective. I'm going to just mention this in passing. Sometimes the early childhood trauma can be historical in nature. So I've worked with people from different communities, different cultures, and I am unpleasantly surprised by how some of them actually remember historical events and wars that come up. It's almost like a family memory or ancestral memory, and it's sitting inside. And then it shows up, and it's the way they react and the way they cope and the way they go on about their lives. So I was working with a group from Korea, and one of them actually talked about memories of the Korean 100-year war. And it was at the time when she wasn't born yet. So you're looking at some kind of family memory. So this little chart here represents about 20 years of research. And one section here, Seasons in a Man's Life, is by Daniel J. Levinson, who was a respected psychiatrist who spent 10 years working and developing this model, and much of the history and the literature we know about developmental sequences have become developed from that. And the second book, Maximize Your Child's Emotional Intelligence, refers to what happens in the first 7 years. So if you look at this, from 0 to 7 up to 21 is the research that I did, and with the patients I worked on and things I checked out, and the rest of it is what Daniel J. Levinson is talking about. So at each point, we go through different learning stages, developmental stages, and if we successfully go through these stages, we develop. But it's almost like every stage is a potential crisis point. Can you traverse the crisis point? So from 0 to 7, we get programmed. We get programmed with a host of 12 commands that our parents talk about, that your parents are supposed to communicate with you. So these are the good, the neutral, and the bad. So the good programs allow you to succeed in life. The neutral programs give or take. The bad programs are the ones that are actually going to be destructive and negative. So you acquire these programs in a non-verbal fashion. So it's not what your parents say, it's how they behave, it's how they live. So if you grew up in an environment where on one level they talked about being nice, being good, and being polite, and that's what they told you, but every time they communicated with each other, they were yelling, they were rude, they were, very in your face, the message you would get is, that is the way you behave. If you're growing up and you lived in a family where people got sick all the time, the unconscious message that you take is, oh, when I grow up, I also must get sick. So I got cases of people whose father may become, when he's about 7 or 8, the father gets a heart attack at 42. And he's programmed in an unconscious fashion that at 42, the males in the family get heart attacks, and so on. So then there is the modeling period. What happens? You learn from your friends and all of that. Then you learn to socialize, and then you enter adulthood. Now, by the time you enter adulthood and you leave your family of origin, you should actually change life, right? It doesn't happen that way. So what happens during this period of programming is that you develop armor, okay? And this is emotional armor. And this armor is only supposed to protect you up to 21. But problem is, you're so used to wearing the armor that you carry this with you for the rest of your life. And the armor is powered by your life force. Then you come to about 35. And something really dramatic happens at this age. You become a biological adult. You no longer have enough energy to power the armor. The armor starts collapsing. And that's when all the unresolved issues start coming up. So most people start having significant traumatic breakdowns from 35 onwards. You can have earlier incidents if something really stressful happens. You are growing up in an environment where you're terribly abused, or you're going to see you have a tiger mom looking after you, then stuff happens, and then they start breaking down earlier. So this traumatic issues that come up are actually as a result of the programming here. So this is why doing deep emotional work, it's only going to be helpful when you deal with the underlying trauma that starts from this period. So the critical issue to understand about this is that when the trauma comes in and it presses the button in your head, you are in a nice, stable state. It's all good. And then suddenly something triggers you, you have an amygdala hijack, and you're out of control. So trauma shuts off your ability, anything that triggers your trauma switches off your ability to make reasoned, positive choices, and you are left to function at the lowest common denominator. So you go back to being a 4-year-old child who's terrified, who's scared, who's afraid, and the whole world is out to get you. And then depending on what was the triggering incident, you go from a state of being calm to being irritated to being angry. It can also be rage, fear, shut down, and all depend on the programming that you have. So until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. So the idea here is, for a lot of people, the hardest part was to recognize they actually had trauma. And only when you recognize you have a problem, then you deal with it. So only when you recognize you have trauma, then you can go on to acknowledge it, work with it, resolve it, and move on. So I remember working with people who have challenges in their lives. They are at work and suddenly feel victimized and overloaded. And the hardest part for them to get is that, did you feel victimized and overloaded when you were about 6 or 7, and it's because of how your parents treated you? Someone else, her brother was always treated better than her, so she felt second best. Didn't matter how well she did it. Another person was a very successful senior executive, C-suite executive, all systems go, and then her father gets really ill. She nurses him throughout that period. He dies, and she collapses and develops rheumatoid arthritis. So trauma-induced reactions include avoidance, addictions like sex, drugs, and alcohol. Other people go to born agains, and this can be religion, politics, or some cause. It doesn't matter, because you're just filling up the gap, the pain of trauma, and you're looking for another cause. They also do intense practices. They can be workaholics, they can do sports, and some of them do meditative practices. So while mindfulness can give you awareness, it can also be used as, like, people use a drug of choice. So it's a drug of choice. So the coping strategies for trauma are things like spending time with people, exercising, journaling, lifestyle changes, counseling, and mindfulness. So what's the difference between traumatic-induced mindfulness and mindfulness? So when you are working with mindfulness and you're dealing with emotional positive changes, what you're then doing is you're being aware of what affects you. You're being aware of how your emotions are impacting you. You're not losing yourself in the endorphin high of mindfulness or exercise and all of that. You're paying attention to what goes on inside. And that is the key. So when we pay attention to what's going on inside, we are slowly switching off our automatic response. You're down-regulating the amygdala hijack. You're allowing your brain to explore possibilities that it wouldn't explore, couldn't explore, didn't know was possible before. Thank you so much. So I didn't want to take over other people's valuable thinking time, talking time, so I kept track of my timing. Over to you, Dr. John.
Thank you, Dr. Sundadas. Don't worry about time. But we'll manage all together. Thank you very much for the very, very enlightening, very short presentation though. I would want to just make 2 remarks here to the participants. We have quite a full room tonight. So firstly, be very, very aware to mute yourself, right? So then there will be less interruptions. But at the same time, I would encourage you, as the speakers are presenting, that you pen your questions on Pigeonhole, right? And the organizers have put down the links. I noticed like one of you or 2 of you put down questions on the chat. It's going to be very difficult for us to track it. The other reason for putting on Pigeonhole is that you can vote on it, right? So some of the questions we're going to see as to how many of you are already impacted by the question already asked, and you give your support. So we want to encourage you to vote it. Others we will see according to how the flow goes. All right. So next up, I'd like to invite Prof. Leslie Lim, and he's going to talk about exploring the dark side of anxiety and depression. Prof. Lim, over to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. John. You can hear me, I hope. Yeah, thank you also to Glenn for inviting me to speak at this webinar. It's good to see so many of you here tonight. Very good evening, very good morning and afternoon to those who are tuning in from different parts of the world. It's great to be here. It's an honor to be here tonight. I've been asked to present on the dark side of anxiety and depression. Now, mental illness has been shrouded in mystery for centuries, for many, many years. And what is becoming unknown breeds myths and misconceptions. So despite the fact that there has been much advances into research, into mental science, medical science, many aspects of mental disorders still remain relatively unknown. They are unknown to healthcare workers, doctors, and to the lay public. Tonight, we want to shed light and to shine the light into dark areas of two conditions, anxiety and depression, so that we can better understand these conditions and also to encourage people to seek help, because help is definitely available. The first dark area we want to look at is stigma. No condition, no medical condition is as stigmatizing as that of mental disorder. And stigma refers to discrimination of mentally ill people, discrimination against people with mental illness, discrimination against healthcare workers or mental health practitioners, and even mental health facilities can be stigmatized. I've worked in hospitals overseas, and very often their facilities, the mental health facilities, are situated at the back of the building. So you enter by the back entrance. That's because of stigma. You don't want the other patients to see the mentally ill. So this results in low self-esteem. It results in non-disclosure. The mentally ill dare not disclose their illness to their colleagues and to their bosses. They will even take leave to attend clinic appointments because they don't want to inform the clinic that they have a psychiatric problem. And for those who are applying for a job, the first box to tick will be that of mental illness. And the question is to tick or not to tick. If you tick yes, you have a mental illness, you can be sure your application form is going to be chucked into the waste bin, and there goes your chance of landing that job. Now, there are some popular myths amongst people with mental problems, and they think if I am rational, if I'm not crazy, then I don't need psychiatric help. And they think that psychiatric treatment is only for those who are crazy. That's not true. They have this common misconception that psychiatric treatments are addictive. So that means once you start the treatment, you cannot stop. That is also not true. You can stop treatment at any time. It's not a matter of the treatment, it is the matter of the illness. The illness requires long-term treatment for many conditions like anxiety and depression. There is also a common misconception that psychiatric treatment damages the health, damages the brain, and causes dementia. That is not true. Many people think that psychiatric treatment is only meant to sedate the person. Again, that is not true. The reason why we prescribe medications is to correct chemical imbalance in the brain. Now, in psychiatry, there are no confirmatory blood tests or scans. So you have to rely on clues, you have to rely on taking a good history from the patient and having a high degree of suspicion of certain illnesses based on the symptoms that you elicit from the patient. For example, we take the condition generalized anxiety disorder. There are 3 groups of symptoms: sleep problems, psychological symptoms, such as feeling fearful, irritable, excessive worry, difficulty relaxing, and then a big group of physical symptoms that are found in the cardiovascular system, the gastrointestinal system, your urinary tract, the sexual symptoms, neuromuscular symptoms, even a decrease in energy, such that you feel anxious or you feel tired very often. Now, if the patient comes and just complains of insomnia, and the doctor fails to notice there are psychological symptoms, or the person looks anxious and he doesn't inquire into psychological symptoms or physical symptoms, then the whole diagnosis of generalized anxiety disorder could be missed out. And if it is missed out, the person doesn't get well, he will develop secondary conditions. Generalized anxiety disorder is often comorbid, or that means there are secondary other secondary conditions such as panic disorder, phobias. There could be mood disorders such as depression and so on. Conversely, if there are prominent physical symptoms and the doctor focuses his attention on investigating these symptoms, it may lead to the person looking for medical problems at the expense of psychiatric problems. And then a lot of time is wasted looking at medical problems. Very often, for those with anxiety problems, the physical tests come back as negative, and there is a problem of over-investigation. If, for example, some tests come back borderline, and then further tests are being ordered. I mentioned that panic disorder may happen. This may be comorbid with generalized anxiety disorder, or it could just arise on its own. A study done by the NUH, published in 1998, showed that 2% of Singaporeans were diagnosed with panic disorder within 1 year from the time of the survey. The lifetime risk is 2 to 5% in the American studies. We don't have more recent figures for panic disorder in Singapore, apart from the phone study. Now, there's a criteria for diagnosis. That means there are panic attacks that arise all of a sudden onset of panic attacks, which I will describe later. And these attacks last for minutes, and there's fear of the next attack. So if you have these three criteria, you can confidently diagnose a patient to be suffering from panic disorder. But I want to say panic disorder, although it can be easily diagnosed, yet it can be also easily missed out. Now, as a Sherlock Holmes person, all of us psychiatrists, we don't have blood tests to confirm the diagnosis, but we have to put on our thinking. We got to put on our Sherlock Holmes hat, and we got to look for clues. And one of the clues, the person suffers from panic disorder, is that they rush to the emergency department. There is no other psychiatric condition apart from depression and suicide risk where a patient rushes to the emergency department, apart from people who have got a suicide intention. Okay, so if a person rushes to A&E department, you know there may be a reason for them to be diagnosed with a panic disorder. Now, there are 13 symptoms of panic attacks, and you can see that these symptoms in yellow may lead a doctor from the A&E department to refer such patients to the cardiologist, or even to the respiratory physician because of breathlessness, or even to the neurologist because of pins and needle sensations. Now, I want you to highlight the 12 and 13, fear of dying, fear of losing control, fear of going crazy. This is what I call catastrophic symptoms. And catastrophic symptoms are seen in panic disorder. They are not seen in any other psychiatric condition. Again, this is a very, very big clue to the diagnosis. And yet many healthcare workers do not pick up on these clues, and they misdiagnose this condition. So the diagnosis can be easily missed if the doctor did not ask about the duration of the attack. Now, this distinguishes panic disorder from generalized anxiety disorder. In generalized anxiety disorder, the symptoms last for hours, but in panic attacks, they last for minutes. They did not ask about catastrophic symptoms. They did not ask about fear of recurrence of these symptoms. So a failure to ask the right questions results in the misdiagnosis. And if the diagnosis is missed, the person will develop other secondary conditions, phobias, depression, substance abuse, and so on, and even suicide thinking. Let's move on to talking about depression. Depression is not just feeling sad, it's more than that. It is a mental disorder. A lot of patients may say, I'm depressed, but I don't have a mental illness. They don't realize that mental illness may include conditions such as depression. Depression has its signs and symptoms, and it interferes with a person's daily life. In Singapore, the lifetime prevalence is 6.3%. 6.3% of Singaporeans have a risk of suffering from major depressive disorder. The female-male ratio is 1.6:1. With regard to socioeconomic status, there's no difference. Whether you're rich or poor, you can be equally at risk of developing this condition. But if you're widowed or you are divorced, you have a higher rate of depression compared to those who are single and unmarried. So these are pictures of celebrities who have suffered from depression. I'm sure you can recognize some of them. And these are celebrities from Singapore who have openly declared that they have suffered from depression. These are celebrities who committed suicide. Very tragic. You can see that they are good looking, they are at the peak of their career, they're so well known, and yet they harbor depression, they harbor suicidal thinking. Depression can be likened to an iceberg. You know, you look at an iceberg on the surface, you see the bit of ice sticking out of the water, but the majority of the iceberg lurks underneath the water surface. So this picture here, where you have the red portion, refers to people who are depressed, who don't seek medical help because they don't realize they have a condition that needs treatment, that requires or amenable to treatment. There's a yellow portion, depression, which is unrecognized by doctors. Maybe these are patients with a lot of physical symptoms or medical problems, and their psychiatric issues are not recognized and hence not treated. So only a tiny portion sticking out of the water is recognized and is being treated. I want to say that depression is a brain disorder. It's not just an emotional disorder, it's a brain disorder, it's a biological disorder. And if it's left untreated, it will lead to treatment resistance. That means it's going to be more difficult to get well. You've got to take more medicines, you've got to take higher dosages of medicines. The person is more prone to recurrences, relapses and recurrences of condition. And then chronic depression may give rise to brain shrinkage. There's enlargement of the holes in the brain called ventricles. And then there is reduction of the size of the hippocampus. The hippocampus is part of the brain responsible for memory, for concentration. So if you have these problems in your brain, you're not going to be able to think very well. You're not going to be remembering very well. You're not going to be able to perform as well as you once did. So the dark side of depression is that the diagnosis could be missed out for a few reasons. If the patient doesn't report depressed mood, if the patient just says, I have sleep problem or they have physical symptoms, then the attention of the doctor may be diverted into treating and investigating those physical symptoms. Now, there are 3 clues to the diagnosis of depression. So when you ask somebody, what is your mood like? They may think you're asking them whether they have a reason to be sad or not. And many people, especially dialect-speaking people, will say there's nothing to be sad about. I live with my children. I have maids to look after me. I have 3 meals plus 2 snacks in a day. I'm well taken care of. So there's nothing to be sad about. So I'm not sad. But if you ask them these 3 questions, whether they feel life is meaningless, whether they wish they went to sleep and never woke up, whether they wish they were dead, they would say yes to 1, 2, or 3 of these questions. I would call them surrogate questions to assess for a person's mood. Now, if the person's depression is not treated, up to 15% of them may die prematurely by suicide. So there are also further clues to the diagnosis. Diminished interest. That doesn't mean that they have absolutely no interest, but they have reduced interest in things that they once were interested in. There's loss of appetite, loss of sleep, and loss of energy. So these three symptoms marked in yellow font represent biological symptoms, and if they are present, would require biological treatment in the form of medications, antidepressant medications. Very often, we don't ask for a libido. We don't ask the patient, have you got a loss of sexual interest? But if you do ask, you will get a positive answer for this question. We mentioned earlier on that depression may not be treated because there are a lot of physical symptoms which may distract the attention of the doctors. Also, if there are depressive symptoms which mimic medical symptoms, for example, loss of appetite and loss of weight. They know that cancer sufferers have got loss of appetite and weight. So if the person has both cancer and depression, cancer can be easily confirmed by scans and by blood tests and by x-rays, whereas depression cannot. So it's easier to diagnose cancer. And then poor depression is left on the side and not recognized and not treated. Some people think that those with cancer diagnosis, especially in the terminal stages, or those who have bereavement, they've lost their loved ones, they have every reason to be sad. So there's no need to treat these conditions. That is not true. If you treat a cancer patient who is depressed, you'll find that their mood is lifted up, even though their cancer is in advanced stage, and they can still enjoy a better quality of life than somebody with cancer and who is depressed. Now, there's one big pitfall, and that is there may be atypical symptoms. We mentioned that depression sufferers, very often they eat less, they have loss of weight, they don't sleep well, but there may be atypical depressions in which the people eat more and they sleep more. So this may confuse the psychiatrist, and they may think that the person is not depressed because he's putting on weight, is eating more and sleeping very well. So this is a pitfall. There are atypical symptoms not to be missed out. Now we turn our attention to suicide. According to WHO, 1 million people killed themselves in the year 2011. Therefore, suicide was the number 13 cause of death worldwide, with one death every 40 seconds. Those older than age 60 are more likely to commit suicide than younger age. Male-female ratio is 3:1. In Singapore, the average is 300 to 400 suicides a year, but in the year 2020, the number jumped to 452. This was the time of the COVID, and this is the highest figure since 2012, representing a 13% increase from the year before. There are certain suicide warning signs. If you read the textbooks of psychiatry, they'll tell you about giving away possessions, saying goodbye, making a will, acting very agitated, anxious, or reckless, and then talking about wanting to die, talking about feeling hopeless, talking about feeling trapped, being in unbearable pain, talking about not wanting to be a burden to others, talking. But I can tell you it is not easy to predict suicide because many successful suicide completers don't talk, they just do it. I came across this case of a man from the hospital I'm working in. He had a conversation with a nursing officer, a normal conversation. The nursing officer reported to us he seemed very normal. 1 hour later, he was found dead. He had jumped from the 6th floor hospital window and fallen to his death and killed himself. And the nursing officer was so traumatized because he thought that he didn't do his duty to spot any warning signs. There were probably no warning signs. So he can be, this man could have been harboring suicidal thoughts and intentions all along without revealing it to anybody. So let's take a closer look at the suicide statistics of 2020. And I've categorized them according to ethnic group and sex. You can see that in most cases, males outnumber females. And then you look at the percentages here. And this is the ethnic distribution of the Singapore population. And you can see here that there are two groups of people with figures in red. And this represents Indians, 20% of Indians. And this is an over-representation when you compare this with the ethnic distribution of Indians in Singapore. Conversely, for Malays, there's an under-representation because only 4.2% killed themselves, whereas the ethnic distribution for Malays is 13%. So we have looked at the dark side of anxiety and depression. Just to give you an example, there are pitfalls in the diagnosis. If undetected and untreated, they may develop comorbid conditions. And hopefully tonight we have shed some light on some of these conditions, anxiety and depression. Hopefully we have demystified these conditions, and hopefully we can encourage people to seek help, because anxiety and depression are definitely treatable conditions, amenable to treatment. Early treatment, early detection leads to early recovery. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Prof. Thank you very much. It's a very enlightening, although quite heavy topic. Yes. I will encourage participants to really get active on the Pigeonhole, because right after Dr. Fred's presentation, we're going to take questions, all right? So do put in your votes, okay? So we have had two very distinguished presentations thus far, and I will thus like to invite Dr. Fred Tope to really kind of like take it home for us and share how do we build our mental fortitude, all right? So once again, Dr. Fred Tope, your time is yours.
Unmute myself. That's the phrase of the 21st century. You are muted. Well, thank you, Glenn, and thank you, John, for facilitating this event. And I'm privileged to be among the panel speakers here. It's good morning for me. It's almost 8 a.m. And for those who don't know me, well, I am Pokemon, like Pokemon. That's what my students call me, Dr. Pokemon. And John and Glenn, I have a problem. I have a problem. You put me last. I have a problem. And after listening to the two distinguished and eminent speakers, I have a lot to, to raise my standard. Wow, it's like I have a problem. Now, actually, this phrase, I have a problem, is something that people don't want to acknowledge. And that's the problem. That's something that we don't talk about. See, especially for men, we don't want to admit that we have a problem. And so we fake it. When we ask, how are you? We're fine, even though we know that. They know that we're not. Oh, I'm fine, don't worry about me. And they ferment it, they fester it into something that's toxic. Well, men particularly tend to fake it, and they tend to hide it. And then as what Dr. Leslie said, we have more men who die of suicide as a result of this. According to this report in UK, 77% of suicides are by men, because men don't want to talk about their problem. They just ferment it, they just keep it, and then the next thing you know, they kill themselves. And top executives are also people who have perhaps stress or suffering from some kind of anxiety, but they don't want to admit that they have a problem. Top executives like here, they are up here. It's lonely at the top. Who can I share my woes with? If I share with my subordinates, they may think that I am incompetent. I'm not good enough to be their leader. And so they are the vulnerable group that they don't want to talk about the problem. And that's the dark side of mental health. People don't acknowledge that they have a problem. Teens are another group of people who may not want to admit, particularly to their parents, that they have a problem. And in this UK, again, statistics, you can see that teens ages 18 to 25, they're the highest group of age group of people who actually committed suicide as compared to other age group. Perhaps the parents are predictable. If I share with my parents I have a problem, my parents will be scolding me, or they may be so concerned about me, they would send me to all kinds of psychiatrists or psychologists or counselors. So I don't want any of that. And so I kept it to myself. And then the next thing we know, they then attempted or committed suicide. Movie stars, as Dr. Leslie had mentioned, they are also people who will not admit or acknowledge they have a problem. So the more I ferment, the more I fester my problem into something that's toxic, then I become the problem. I am now fused with the problem, and therefore I am depressed, I am anxious, me and my problem becomes one. But at this stage, they don't want to talk about it too. They don't want to acknowledge that they have the problem. Family members, parents, spouses used to come to us and said, hey, I have a child who has this problem, and can you help? See, as long as they don't acknowledge that they have a problem, as long as they don't think that they are the problem, it would be quite challenging for any counselor, psychologist, or psychiatrist to try and diagnose that person. They have to talk about their problem and what those problems were. They become the problem. They are fused with the problem. So they are depressed. I am depressed. So my name is Fred. I'm depressed. So depression and me and Fred becomes one. I'm so fused with it. So if we have a problem, hey, be vulnerable, seek help, share, talk about it, solve. Because when we are able to open ourselves to others to help us, you know what? Instead of I have a problem, I am the problem, I have the solution. So the problem here is not the problem. It is how you deal with your problem. That is the problem. This is not the problem. This is the problem. When we fake it, we ferment it, we fast it, we don't talk about it. That's the dark side of mental health. A lot of people, we know they need help, but they don't acknowledge it. Ask them, how are you? I noticed that you are not feeling good. They were like, I'm well, don't worry about me, I'm well. The next thing you know, bam. So anxiety is the mother of all psychological problems, as far as I'm concerned. If we can manage our anxiety with our psyche, we can manage a lot of our emotional problems. Now, the Greek language, the Greek word for anxiety is merimnao. It means split mind. So when we are anxious, our mind is split into two, split between our imagination of what's going to happen, what's going to take place, and our reality. So I'm sure we have a dinner appointment with family, friends, and all that, and we are talking to them. They are physically present, but they're not mentally or emotionally present, right? You are talking for the last 5 minutes, but they caught nothing at all. Well, that's because their imagination has overwhelmed them. And so they live with very reality in their lives. So if they fake it, they ferment it, they fester it, they will lose touch with reality. And then it develops into greater psychological problems like schizophrenia and all that. So we need to clear the air for them. So in order to solve this split mind, we convert this into a mathematical formula, X and Y. So mathematics is problem solving, and so is psychology. So, hey, we use a lot of this matrix, X and Y matrix, to solve problems. So the Y-axis here is your demands in life, and the X-axis here is your awareness. The more aware that you have a problem, the better it is for treatment. So the problem that we have is here. The problem is not the problem. It's what you declare about the problem that becomes the problem. You got a problem? So when we face with a problem and we have very negative bias about the problem and about ourselves, we are actually pumping up the Y-axis. We are increasing the demands based on our own biases. The problem is not the problem. It's our biases that cause the problem. And, I'm a Singaporean, I'm living in the States, and, Singaporeans, we have this morbid way of expressing a problem. When we have a problem, or when we realize that something grave, we are facing something grave, we would say, die, die, die. This time, surely die. In all dialects, we also have that, right? In Malay, mati. This time, surely mati. Or sela, 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 sela. So we have a way to actually catastrophize our problem with those semantics. And with our biasness, then we tend to blame ourselves, blame others, try to deflect our problem onto others, and then we may feel ashamed of ourselves. There is a difference between shame and guilt, right? It's okay to feel guilty about what you've done that may have caused this problem, but it's not okay to be shameful, all right? Guilt attack the action. shame attacks the actor. So once you attack the actor, then the actor becomes fused with the problem. I am ashamed of myself. I'm not guilty. I should be guilty about not studying enough, perhaps not putting enough effort in my job, but I'm ashamed that I am not competent. That's the difference. As a result of this, many then result in dysfunctional action. High Y here demands, which is artificially being pumped up by our thought processes, by our psyche. High Y and low awareness. This is where 99% of our stress and anxiety comes from. It is actually resulting from our own psyche. And therefore, we are now fused with our problem. Me and anxiety become one. I am fused because I am conned by my mind to be fused with my problem. And that's why we are confused. Right? We are conned into fusing, and therefore people suffer from anxiety, they suffer from bitterness, confusion, depression, and they escape into self-medication such as alcoholism, drugs, and all that. So as a result of this, they experience emotional deregulation. Now, to help ourselves, we need to acknowledge, number one, we want to help ourselves to deal with our challenges in life. The first thing is we need to acknowledge that I have a problem. I need help. Acknowledgement. We need to acknowledge the problem, but leave the solution. Not deny the problem and live in denial. Sometimes positive thinking can be a form of denial. I don't think about the problem, I have no problem. That's positive thinking. We need to acknowledge the problem and look at the possibilities. What are the solutions out there? Confront it, deal with it, get over it with it, and then live with peace and freedom as a result of that. Right? Accepting realities is the real path to freedom, or sometimes it may be the only path to freedom and peace. What is denied does not necessarily go away. People don't talk about this. They don't talk about, I have a problem, and that's the problem in itself. So we can see that this picture of the ostrich, is putting its head under the sand. Sometimes we thought, by not looking and by not acknowledging the problem will just go away like this. Like a child, when they hide their eye, when they close their eyes, or they use their hand to close their eyes and all that. They say, if I don't see you, that means you cannot see me. Yeah? Sometimes, even as an adult, we have that kind of attitude. If I don't think about the problem will not think about me. Yeah, no. The problem will haunt you. It will follow you all the days of your life. So the first thing we need to do is to acknowledge, talk about it, and then have a strong belief system. Change your belief system. If your life stink, it could be your thinking stink, because stinking thinking leads to stinking living. So be careful what you think, because your thoughts run your life. Your belief system can bind you, or it can free you. It can bind you, it can trap you, it can imprison you, or it can free you. It's all in here. If we go to Chiang Rai, you will visit the elephant camp that was there, and young baby elephants that were just born, they tied them to a huge tree. They just cannot escape because they are young. The tree is stronger. Every time they try to escape, the noose get tighter, it hurt their leg. And it comes to a breaking point, when this young elephant just resigned to the fact that whenever there's a rope that tied to their leg, they just stop escaping. That limit as a result of that limit their potential. So when they grow up to be a huge, humongous animal, every time the owner tied that rope on the leg of this elephant to us, even to a small pole, it will not escape because the mind is trapped. I once had this patient who was depressed, and she was suicidal. Her boyfriend and her was involved in robbery, and the robber stabbed the boyfriend 7 times, and he died on the spot. And she felt that she was responsible for the death of her boyfriend, because when she saw the knife, that the robber brandished at them, she panicked and she screamed and yelled, "Don't kill us, don't kill us!" And when she panicked the robber. In order to silence her, the robber then tried to stab her. But the boyfriend intervened and fought with this robber with a knife. The boyfriend fought barehanded and was stabbed 7 times and died on the spot. And she became even more hysterical, obviously so. This is a very traumatic event. So she tried to commit suicide. She broke the mirror in the bathroom and tried to use those broken pieces of mirror to stab herself. And she said this, "He died because of me. Let me die." He died because of me. Let me die. And so she attempted suicide many times. And the medical director called me up and said, "Can you help with this case?" I went to her and I said, I'm a psychologist. I'm here to, work with you. She said, do you not understand English? You're from Asia. Do you not understand English? I want to die. He died because of me. Let me die. Let me die. And I said, all I need is just 5 minutes from you, just 5 minutes. If you don't like what I say in that 5 minutes, you can dismiss me as your therapist, as your psychologist, and the doctors in the hospitals may just assign you to another one. So I don't need any help. I don't need any help because I just want to die. He died because of me. And subsequently, there was like a standoff. The parents were there. The parents tried to coax her and said, just listen to him. 5 minutes, that's all. She slumped into the chair. She looked down. She kept quiet. I take that as a sign for me to go on with my 5 minutes. So I talk about the boyfriend, how I admire him for being a brave young man. She looked at me and said, what's the point? He died because of me. I said, I disagree with you. He did not die because of you. He died for you. He wanted you to live, and that's why he fought with that robber with a knife. If you are successful in your suicide attempt, his death will be in vain. You need to live because he died for you, not because of you. Now that semantics did something into her mind. She kept quiet for a long pause. There was a long pause. She looked down for a long while. I'm not sure how long it was, 10, 15 minutes. She was quiet, and I was quiet because I don't want to interrupt her thoughts. And then finally she looked up and said, I will live. His death will not be in vain. That semantic, that belief system changed. Sometimes garbage in is not garbage out. Garbage in, garbage stays. That's the problem. If garbage in and garbage out immediately, there's not a problem. Hey, it just flow out, right? But when garbage comes in, it stays with us, then we become the garbage, right? So we need to have that strong mental belief, study cognitive behavioral therapy that will change your belief system. When your B's change, your C will change, and then you need to have courage. It takes courage now for you to acknowledge that you have a problem. It takes courage for you to change your belief system, to ask for help, to tell people that, hey, this is the solution. Would you be willing to look at it? It takes courage. Dr. Thomas Komura, Pre-Music, I really love his name. Pre-Music. His family existed before music ever came about. Dr. Pre-Music. He did, after decades of research about confidence and filled with fascinating evidence, he said this in this book: confidence is virtually worthless. Confidence is overrated. Now, confidence is, this did the study of confidence in comparing with failing. We all know that, rational people know that if you fail in one thing, that doesn't mean that you are a total failure all your life. You will not be a total failure. The same with confidence. Just because you're confident with one aspect of your life, that doesn't mean that you're going to be confident in every aspect of your life. That's the danger. When you feel that you are confident in every aspect of your life and you fail at something, then your confidence plunges, and that's going to depression. So instead of raising your child, instead of telling yourself to be confident, tell yourself to be courageous. You see, courage precedes confidence. Without courage, there's no confidence. Confidence is doing something that you are already familiar with. If you have been an accountant for the last 20 years, doing bookkeeping, no problemo, no problemo. But if you are not an accountant and you are being tasked to do bookkeeping, then you will feel a bit flustered because that's not something that you're confident with. But if you are courageous, you can say, okay, I can try, I'll do it. You see, when a person falls, it is not confidence that picked them up. It is courage. Courage to stand up again and say, I'm going to try it. I'm going to try it. I'm going to overcome this. So you look at hurdlers. Hurdlers know that they have obstacles, but their eyes are not focused on the problem or the obstacles. Their eyes were on the finishing line. I acknowledge this. I believe I can overcome this, and I have the courage to confront it and move on and finish that race. Courage is not the lack of fear, but the ability to face it. And so you have the ABC here: acknowledgement, belief system, and courage. Yeah. So the more aware you are, the more you are diffused from the problem. The more you're diffused from the problem, and the higher your awareness, no matter how high your why may be, then you're able to meet that demands. This is where we build our resilience. Escaping it, not acknowledging it, not talking about it doesn't build your resilience. It just helps you to escape for a little while. So the problem is not the problem. It starts here. Are you able to acknowledge and talk about it, or are you just hiding and become negative about life? And then you go on to that lifestyle of stress and escapism and depression and all that. So the problem here is not the problem. Do we fake it? Do we ferment it? Do we fester it and you become the problem? Or do you seek help, you share, you solve, and you have the solution? So here you have the solution because you acknowledge it. You have a belief system that changed. Sometimes we need someone to tell us that our belief system is flawed, and that can change our mindset, and that can change our living too. And we need that courage to say, hey, yeah, as a man, I have a problem, but that doesn't make me a weak man. Actually, when you acknowledge that you have a problem, you are strong because you're courageous, right? So if you're going through anxiety, you allow your imagination to rule you. That means you are living in very little space as far as your reality is concerned. Let's clear the air. So that here you live with that clarity of life, the freedom and the peace and love and joy and all that you can enjoy in life, right? So harnessing your psychology to build mental fortitude, you need to acknowledge it. Talk about it. The dark side of mental health is that when we don't acknowledge that we are the problem and we push the blame towards others. And essentially, we do a lot more blame-storming than brainstorming to help ourselves. So, hey, change your belief system, change your thinking, and then you change your thinking, living. Promote courage. If you are a parent, raise your child to be courageous, not to be confident. I have a problem. If you acknowledge that, let's talk. All right, back to you, John and Glenn. Woo-hoo.
Thank you so much, Dr. Fred. The dark side that we were tackling, I can see so much light coming through from our very esteemed and eminent, professors. All right, so if you can, just round of applause to really acknowledge, all that you have given. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Now I have the unenviable task of sifting through questions, okay, while we call back our distinguished speakers onto a virtual panel, spotlighted, right? So we're going to focus our attention on Pigeonhole, right? And I'm going to try this because I have been given access as a moderator to pick, the questions, and let me see whether it'll be fleshed out. All right, so the order of it is that we have a lot of questions, okay? So just to manage expectations, we have about 25, 30 minutes, yeah? Manage expectations, we are not going to do all of them. In fact, current count is 52 questions. So thank you very much for your questions. Thank you very much. The organizers will take note of all these questions, yeah? But what we're going to do is that we're going to tackle by votes for some of them, and some it would be by matter of subject interest, okay? So not withstanding the number of votes, but just by the topics, right? And I would take the prerogative to just ask our esteemed panel. Some of it will be directed, I believe, at the presentations that were made, and others could be just open up. All right, so here it goes. Let me see whether I can do this. If I can, yes, it's coming on, I hope. Yes, all right. So this question was asked by Indian, and I believe a slight typo here, but how do we deal, I believe it's deal, not due, how do we deal with our childhood trauma if we have forgotten those incidents being so young, right? So perhaps Dr. Sundandas, because you spend quite a bit talking about trauma, can I arrow this to you, please?
So the first thing is that, like, I'll go with what Dr. Fred talked about, is to acknowledge you have a problem. So you will not go directly to the childhood trauma, but you will acknowledge that you're having some challenges in your life. So when you start with acknowledging that you have some challenges in your life, then you will notice that you will have certain repeated emotional responses that keep coming up. So if you have an issue with authority, every time you walk into your office and your boss tells you stuff, you overreact. So the first step is to acknowledge that the way you're reacting to your boss, who actually triggers off your father or your uncle who used to give you a hard time, and that's bringing up some emotional reactions. So the first step is to acknowledge that's what you feel. And once you do that, and you become aware that you have a certain repeated emotions coming up, then you have begun the journey towards uncovering it. So very often, one of the standard exercises we get our clients to do is to keep an emotion diary and notice what emotions, like 3 times a day, they keep encountering over and over again. Because in a healthy person, your emotional stuff will go up and down, good stuff, bad stuff. But when it keeps being repeated again and again, it's almost like a button is stuck. That's the beginnings of uncovering your emotional trauma. Then once you've got that, there are specific processes that you can go through to uncover the core episode.
Right. Thanks, Doc. Anyone else, like maybe Prof or Dr. Fred, would you want to add on? Yes, Prof.
I am not a trauma specialist or childhood trauma specialist. Sometimes we don't have to remember incidents. If we don't remember, then I think that will be good. Don't need to dig out something that you don't remember. Just leave it there and then learn to move forward and learn to, envision yourself a better life ahead, rather than trying to find problem and trying to find fault with our past. If we cannot remember, hey, just leave that alone, move on and move forward. That's my thoughts.
Thanks, Dr. Fred. Prof, anything, Prof?
I agree with Dr. Tok. I fully agree with him.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. Right. So let me figure out then another question, and this is asked by Olive. Let me see whether I can pull it up. Yes, this is quite an interesting question because it's about going natural, all right? And Olive asked this question about what natural methods are there to help people with mental health issues without relying on pharmaceutical drugs. Prof, can I arrow you first and then we open up to the others?
Oh, I'm not a homeopathic practitioner, so I'm not in a good position.
Oh, okay. All right. Maybe
actually, this is I do a lot of biochemical nutritional work. So there are epigenetic triggers like methylation, like liver, how your phase 1, phase 2 detox pathways, how you process certain B vitamins like methylfolate. So there are a bunch of products that I work with for clients who have this. And the basic stuff to start off with is make sure you increase your protein intake, add fish oils, and have a good B complex. And add magnesium. Those are the basics. Then you can get more specific and more detailed.
all right. Thanks, Doc. Okay, so I hope you've gotten that. Let me now take another one. And because we have this thing about depression, right? So I want to pick this up. And this was asked by participant who called himself or herself perplexed, right? How to stop the cycle of depression relapse, and again without medication. After recovery, where one is so good and normal, relapse happens after a few years, and the cycle seems to continue, right? So, distinguished panel, any one of you can just pick it up and help perplex with this question.
The thing about depression is that it can last, it can recur, and even if it gets well, the person seems to be very normal, it can still recur. And out of the blue, it can recur. Sometimes due to stress, sometimes without stress, it can recur. I think it's just the biochemistry in the brain that needs to be reset. And so if it happens very often, I think continuation of treatment, even at medium dose. In fact, the latest teaching is that the dose that got you well keeps you well. So if you don't want to relapse, then you have to take medicine, or else you run the risk of relapse. And when you have relapse, it may take some time for you to recover. So I think to prevent relapse, our psychiatric teaching and advice is that you continue with medication.
Right. Thanks, Rolf. Okay. Let me just quickly
I would think
yes, go ahead. Dr. Fred, please go ahead.
disciplined lifestyle do play a very important role in preventing depression relapse. For instance, if I'm depressed, I depend only on medication to get me well. That's one of the ways of getting ourselves out of that depressed state. But we can do it through mental building, through positive, thinking about our lives and be grateful for what we have. And I think one of the most important ways to prevent a relapse from depression is that we have to have a good routine of physical exercises. And it's something that we must do every day. I think that your physical body must be healthy to fight your mental stress. And many times, we might be depressed. We just don't want to go out under the sun to have that vitamin D and to sweat it out and to deal with our depression. So if we surround ourselves with friends who are not toxic, yeah, and we have good social network, and we find meaning in our work rather than complain about work all the time, and we eat well, we exercise well, then I would think that relapsing will be harder to, Yep.
Yes. Thank you, Dr. Fred. And I like your point about not having toxic friends. And perhaps maybe ensuring that we ourselves are not toxic. Yes. So there is a question here, and I believe in Prof's presentation about anxiety. This is one of big issues that are faced not only just during the pandemic, right? But in this one that was asked anonymously. And this has to do with perhaps family members and caregivers, right? So as family members or caregivers, what are some things that we should be mindful of while caring for a person with anxiety disorders, right? So Prof first, and then maybe the others as well. Yes.
So this advice is not just for people with anxiety, but with people with psychiatric problems in general. So as family and caregivers, have a listening ear. Don't be so quick to jump in with your answers and your advice. Very often the person who is in need requires a listening ear so that they can offload themselves, they can ventilate their frustration and their problems without feeling judged. So be supportive. If they have missed their appointments, try and make an appointment for them and bring them back to attend to the clinic, and so that they can resume their treatment. And as a doctor, I would encourage them to continue with their medications. So don't stop your medications until the doctor says it's okay to stop your medications. So just journey with them and offer a listening ear, be supportive to them, Now, the other thing is, do not often give repeated reassurances. You just give once or twice, it's okay. But reassurance, if given too often, can result in reassurance-seeking behavior, because that kind of reassurance request becomes a habit, and becomes reinforced. So, you know, when people are anxious, they keep on asking advice and keep on asking the same questions in many, many different formats. So if you keep on giving them the answer, they will actually develop a habit of asking the same questions over and over again.
Yeah. Thanks, Prof. Dr. Fred or Dr. Sundadas, anything to add on this?
I totally agree with all those comments, especially in the one about ensuring that you give more of a listening ear than offer advice. Because the advice then becomes another game for them to play with. But if you listen to them, they get to offload, and then the pressure inside goes down.
Right. Thank
I
you
think
so much.
there's a skill that most caregivers and family members need to be adept with. It's called motivational interviewing skills. You can have a lot of all this information about MI, motivational interview, on the internet, on YouTube. I think it's about about encouraging a person to acknowledge that they have help and they need help, and then rather than push them into the corner. So a skill such as motivational interviewing skills is very much needed if you have a family member who's going through some anxiety issues and some psychological problems. You know, then you can use that technique to encourage them.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much for that. I'm reminded about timing, and now I'm just going to scroll through because I saw some patterns of questions, and I'm just going to pick up at random. So this is why I ask for indulgence, because not by votes, but just by subject interest. And there's one, and that has to do with parental and even family environments. So this was asked by Lynn. How much of a kid's behavioral mental issues, such as ADHD, are caused mainly by parental, family, environmental factors rather than biological and chemical imbalances? Yeah, so panel, how can we help this?
I deal a lot with children like this. And I'm going to say that it's sometimes hard to draw the line between nature and nurture, because yes, there are some biochemical factors, but moreover, the way the parents treat the kid can push them in a certain direction even more. And the second factor is that our current teaching environment and our movies and our TV, like Sesame Street, encourage this short attention span. So I don't know how much of it is really pathology and how much of it is a social mold.
Yeah.
I think the short answer for me is it is all of the above. It's hard to give percentage to this and all that. I think it is all of the above. It's a combination of many factors that lead to a person having this behavioral mental issues that you talk about.
Yeah, thanks for that. And I've seen there was one, and I thought it was pretty interesting because it didn't come forth as something typical, but okay, this was asked, right? And feel the pain, right? What if the trauma caused by our own child? I have a very lovely childhood, so I don't have trauma in that area. Now as a parent of the explosive child, create a trauma for me as parent. Yes.
I totally feel for the parent, and every now and then you could have a really challenging child from factors that you couldn't control. Okay, And that's a real issue. And so both parent and child need support, and you need to find people who can support you in different ways. It's great that you actually acknowledge that you feel traumatized by what's going on. So as Dr. Tok said, acknowledge there is a problem. Second, you may need to get specialized help. But third, explosive child, this doesn't really explain the nature of the problem. So the other stuff is that sometimes some people have a certain mental model of how children should behave. And when the child is too far from that, they experience it as being traumatic.
Spot on, Dr. Sudan does. Sometimes, because we have very good childhoods, right? Everything is perfect. Our parents care for us, love for us, provide for us. Because we have very good childhood, then we grew up to become softer people as an adult and softer parents. And because that's not who we are as a child, we were never explosive. And now my child is explosive. Then it creates that impression of trauma that may have created for you. And so
yes, absolutely, absolutely.
Too much of the good things is not good also. Too much of the bad stuff not
too
good.
much of a good thing is not good. Absolutely. Yeah. I've seen cases of this as well. Yes. Not enough framework, not enough breadth and width of experiences.
Right. Thank you very much, esteemed panel. If I may, I just want to tackle one question. I think it's perhaps, it's also in my mind, and I'm just wondering, this was asked by worried mom of four, right? Is depression genetic? Can it be passed down? I'm just curious.
I think most psychiatric problems, you get genetic component as well as environmental component. So yes, it can be genetic, especially if you find family members with the same condition. Sometimes there may be skipped generations, but if you find several members of a family with the same condition, or even a different condition, so maybe one member of the family with depression, one with anxiety, that it shows as some genetic predisposition going on. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the technical term for this is phenotype.
Yes.
There was a study on pregnant women during 911, and they were traumatized by it, and their trauma was actually passed on to their child, and that actually became more genetic. The child became more genetically predisposed to have psychological or anxiety problems. And yes, it is a longitude study here in America about these pregnant women and their children. It's an interesting study. Yes, it can be genetically predisposed.
It's epigenetic, which means it's gene expression is triggered, so there is a tendency for it, and then the environment triggers it. It can be both biochemical epigenetics or emotional epigenetics.
I suppose fear can be passed on to the child as well, the unborn child.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you very much, distinguished panel. I am just, perhaps switching from just the questions now into perhaps if everybody on the panel, would you have a word of advice just to close up your presentations for tonight or for today? What would that be? All right, so if I can just switch it back, spotlight onto our panel and switch this view, and perhaps maybe I will start by the other order that we had, and then maybe ask Dr. Fred Tok if you just have words of advice for us on top of all that you presented, but to just summarize it, yeah, what would that be?
Okay. Oh, wow. You put me on the spot, John. I have a problem now. I think number one, don't live your life just for you. There are other people that may be involved in your life. If life is just evolve around you, then You will be insecure with people who may feel maybe better than you, better looking than you. But life is not just about you, and there is no finishing line in life. You may lose the battle tonight, but that doesn't mean that that's the finishing line for you. You may even win the battle tonight, but that doesn't mean that that's the end for you. So life goes on, whether you win or you lose. There's no finishing line. The only finishing line we have is when we move from this world to the next, assuming that there is a next. But that's the only finishing line. Okay. And thirdly, move on quickly. Laugh. Don't hold on to toxic problem.
Thank you, Dr. Fred. May I ask Prof. Lim, what are your words of advice?
I just want to follow up from what Dr. Tope said earlier on about recognizing the problem. Because a lot of people with the problem deny the problem. So recognizing the problem is the first step towards recovery. So recognizing the problem, reading up about it. Nowadays, there are a lot of literature in the internet. There are good websites you can look at. Mayo Clinic is one of them. I'm not trying to promote them, but they produce a lot of educational material. Read up about conditions and trying to recognize it in yourself and seek help early. The earlier you seek help, the better your chances of recovery and the better chances of you returning back and fulfilling your best potential in life.
Thank you so much, Prof. And Dr. Sunandas.
I would like to echo what the previous two speakers said, because first, recognize that you have a problem. Second, have the courage to do something about it. Third, think of the wonderful life you can have in the future and how you're going to contribute to other people. Because when you overcome your problems, you're going to be incredibly empowered. You're going to have so much more. So how do you move forward to embrace that positive future? Because that is going to be the attractive factor.
Right. Thank you very much, panel. It's been such an enlightening, session. And I hope it has been for all of you. So once again, a round of applause in recognition and acknowledgement for the fantastic. Well, now I take my leave and hand over to Mr. Glenn. Over to you, Glenn.
Thank you, John. And thank you all our distinguished panelists. If there's one thing I learned from tonight is that we've got a serious problem. And that's because at AOL and JLC, we thought we were offering a solution to an ongoing problem that the pandemic has caused us by offering equipping classes and webinars such as this. Then I realized that every solution actually creates a new problem. What's our new problem? Our new problem now is that there's such a high demand for such education and talks and sharing that it is forcing my team right now, like behind the scenes, all this while we are handling private messages, requests, and questions. We do intend to get back to our drawing board to offer more such platforms. And earlier on, for those of you who did not hear me open up in my welcome address, I did mention that we are soft launching our academy. It is going to feature high-level training, equipping, and education in all forms and all sorts of platforms. And if you don't mind me, before we end, we did say that we'll end everything at 9:45, so just give me 1 minute, okay? Two things I want to announce. The first is that we do want to announce one such equipping platform, and this is called the Counseling Skills Training. And this is the first time that we are offering it in conjunction with WSQ. Those of us who are in Singapore, you know the Workforce Skills Qualifications, the Skills Future. This is our government's way of upskilling everybody. And the funds, there's training grants for those of you Singaporeans who want to attend this. I'm very excited about this because we are launching this just this month. In fact, this weekend we're very tight and short of spaces. It's very limited, but please feel free to scan this QR code, and the links is being pumped right now into the chat box. It's got the CST module, the counseling skills training that seeks to equip lay people. You know, one of my vision was to equip every first responder, the person on the street, because if we can get the tools and strategies into the hands of the first responders, I mean, that will really help our healthcare system. I mean, there's from what I know, the appointments and the queues to seeing counselors and psychotherapists are long. And by the time we reach there, man, things have already escalated. So this is the first very exciting project that we're launching. The second one is also something I'm very excited. We just launched last year. And ever since this, the launch of this campaign called EDT is one of my signature programs. You know, I run many different training curriculum and content. Energy defragmentation therapy is exactly what our esteemed panelists have mentioned about the the conflict and the incongruence within oneself. And so this is has been running since last year, and it's always sold out, and now it has got to a point where I have to question whether I should run this on a regular monthly basis. Again, what you can do is click on this, scan your QR code and also click on the link, and you'll be led to a page where there's more information, you'll learn more about it, and also a free preview training video just for you guys. Okay, I'll be the one sharing, and you get to find out a little bit more about this modality. Okay, so these are just the two. There will be more coming up. Those of you who have registered for tonight's webinar, you're already in a mailing list. We will be announcing and releasing the next webinar in time to come.